So imagine going to your job, which is school, every day and feeling rubbish and feeling like you just can't do it. And then you come home and you feel rubbish because your parents are telling you, well, you're not getting the grades. So it's an all around rubbish feeling. So by the time they get to middle school and high school, a lot of students have just checked out. They're just waiting to be done.
Throw out homework, worksheets, ominous buildings, hall passes, herds of students, grades, all of it. What would you build? If you start with the amazing thing that is a young person, how would you honor all of their strengths and abilities? How would you remember that this is about them? If Dewey was right, and education is not preparation for life, education is life itself, we need to do more than rebuild schooling. We need to rethink living. Welcome to the Education is Life podcast, where we're having honest discussions on the state of education, where it is, where it can be, and all of the stories in between. Aditi, welcome to the Education is Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I have quite a history. So I was born in India. When I was 5, we moved to Zambia, which is in Africa. So I had most of my elementary schooling in Zambia. And then I went to boarding school at the age of 12 to Liverpool, England. Then I came to the United States when I was 18 for college and settled in the booming metropolis of Naperville, Illinois. And then, boarding school was a whole new environment, just because at the age of 12, getting on an airplane and going to a completely different country, that sort of set the stage for that. So when I meet people now who are like, oh, I'm so worried about my child going to middle school or high school, I'm like, oh, for God's sake, really, fiddlesticks, get over it. Because it just seems so simplistic given what I went through at 12. My mum, is a doctor, my dad an engineer, very stereotypical Indian family. So it was all about tutoring and education. That was paramount in my sort of life at that time.
There's a question I've been wrestling with a little bit lately is when people say that they were a good student or they're not a good student, or my kid's a good student or not a good student, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Well,
to me, then as a child, it meant that I didn't measure up to my peers. It was all about reinforcement. Everybody got reinforcement for getting good grades. I was not getting that reinforcement. I was getting a lot of attention for not getting good grades. But as I got older, it became very detrimental psychologically for me.
Were you getting lots of negative attention?
Well, my brother was the smarty in the family, and my dad was an engineer, my mum was a doctor, so I was just not meeting the mark. And the expectation was that I was going to be a doctor. There was no other option. That was just sort of the path laid out for me. So I felt like I was disappointing everyone all the time, the quintessential black sheep of the family. And in boarding school, the added layer of being a non-white in the 80s in an all-girls boarding school, very high-end. There was a lot of racism. It was hard. So I think all those factors impacted my education, because it wasn't just about learning academics. It was learning to navigate a life with differences, I guess.
Yeah. So what lessons did you take away from that?
Well, when I first got there, I was very shy and I didn't interact much. But toward the end, I really broke out of my shell and started standing up for myself. I think that was a big lesson. But the problem with the educational system in England, it's very sort of one size fits all. Like, this is just the way you learn. And if you don't get it, oh well. And there's one big test at the end of the year. And if you bomb that, oh well. Like, there weren't any remediating options along the way.
Like, either you can do the work or you can't, and that's really on you, which for a lot of people can make school kind of rough. What brought you to the States?
I didn't do well in my A levels, which is basically the test you take before you get into university, and you only take 3 subjects. So I took the sciences because that was mandated. And I did rubbish. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I knew I wasn't going to med school, at least in England. My brother was already in the United States, so my dad decided to send me here. I took the SAT, did fairly rubbish on that too. And, basically ended up at a university here, just sort of saying, okay, we'll figure it out. And got here. And that's when I had a real revelation. When I came to the United States, I realized that academia, at least higher level academia, there was a lot of opportunities for remediation, right? If you weren't good at statistics, you could meet with the professor outside and get some additional help. You could do extra credit assignments. Like, these were not options when I grew up in England. It was, you either did well on the test or you did nothing. So that was huge. And the other thing, because I didn't have all the pressures, the negative psychological pressures that I was facing in England, and probably with my family too, I flourished. I really thrived in the academic setting, and I really surprised myself. I was like, gosh, I guess I'm not stupid. And I would take like 4 classes at a time. My GPA was brilliant. I graduated, with high honors. I was like so shocked at myself, honestly. But I still had this sort of inkling that I was stupid, that I was not meant for academia, that I was not meant to be a doctor because I wasn't smart enough. So after my bachelor's, I quit school. Like I said, I'm just going to be a therapist, and I left it sort of there, much to the dismay of my family.
I think that speaks to the level of expectations of your family, where it's, I'm just going to be a therapist.
Yeah. Yes. They were sad. That's the funny thing. They were so sad about that. My dad would remind me every day that, you really need to go back to school. But I think he too sort of gave up on it for a bit. Then I roll around to age 40, and I was like, no, I'm not going to stay in this. I can't do this to myself, where I'm constantly telling myself that I'm stupid, and that's why I limited my abilities. So I went back to school and I got my doctorate, and I was floored that I was able to do it. And of course, when I told my dad that, he was beside himself, so happy. And I remember the program is a doctorate program versus a PhD, there's a slight difference. And I told my dad, I said, well, Dad, it's not quite a PhD per se. It's actually called a doctorate. And he goes, well, are they going to call you doctor? I'm like, yes. That was all that he was worried about, which I just thought was funny. And he was just so excited. He cried at my graduation. So like, for him, culturally, it just meant so much. It really didn't mean much to me. I really couldn't care less about the title, but I had to prove it to myself that I wasn't as stupid as I had grown up believing that I was.
Yeah, there's some interesting research that came out, I think late last year maybe, about parenting styles in different countries and how they compare to how much of a safety net there is for families. And the ones who come from countries where the safety net is the smallest, so the difference between the wealthiest and the most poor is pretty large, have the kind of strictest parenting styles.
I can believe that.
And so I thought that was some interesting things to play into, from an educationist life standpoint, right? I mean, it's not just about school you're going to. This is your life, right? Even though you're 12 or you're 8 or you're 18 or you're 22, like, you are still living. This is still your life. And figuring out how the pressures of quote unquote being a good student play into that is something I'm really interested in kind of digging in more to, because I do think a lot of people end up with, well, I must be stupid, when traditional schools just look at a very small slice of what human potential is, when you have so much more ability to do different things.
Oh, I so agree. And I think another perspective for me is that for our children, their job is going to school, right? That's their career for the time being. So imagine going to your job, which is school, every day and feeling rubbish and feeling like you just can't do it. And then you come home and you feel rubbish because your parents are telling you, well, you're not getting the grades. So it's an all around rubbish feeling. So by the time they get to middle school and high school, a lot of students have just checked out. They're just waiting to be done. And that's what I experienced myself, and I didn't want that for my children. And I do think that's a lot of what's going on in schools today.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that either, but in Chicago, in the Chicago public schools, high school students in any given year, 40% of them experience clinical depression.
Mm.
And I think a lot of it is like what you're talking about, where it's imagine if you were in that job and you can't
Mm-hmm.
quit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get paid for it.
Right.
Your biggest support network rides you for not being good at it.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a really difficult situation.
Right. I agree. And I think I was in that psychological depression, at least in the academic level, for a long time. I think I still carry some of it with me. There's no doubt. Like a lot of my peers will tell me, you've done so much. You should believe in yourself. And I have to remind myself, I have to cue myself to be positive about my academic abilities.
Yeah, no, I feel as though we create so much baggage in that kind of years of 0 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
That if we can find ways, and one of the things we talk about at Greenfields is how can we make sure that we aren't creating baggage. In fact, we're making young people more resilient to be able to deal with things that do come up. Because I do think it's formative, and it's really hard to unchange those things because they become the neural pathways that get developed.
Exactly.
So at 40, you go and get your doctorate, and
Mm-hmm.
your doctorate, and then what did you do with that?
Well, getting my doctorate really meant that I could pursue an academic position if I wanted to. Teaching was my goal at the end of the day in higher education. So I've been doing that and working as a therapist.
And you're a parent now.
Yes.
Is that true?
Indeed, 3 boys.
So now that you're a parent and you're seeing your children through education, formal schooling, what has their experience been like?
Well, you have 4 children, I have 3. They're all different. And my first one, my eldest, school comes easy to him. He's lucky. I'm quite envious. My middle one, not so much. And so that's really where my journey started, was with Tristian, my middle son. I just didn't want him to have those life experiences that I had related to school. So for the first, until he was about 8 years old, I was constantly working with him, tutoring him myself, teaching him, researching as much as I could. I mean, I was on him like white on rice constantly. And, so he's 8 years old, he's in school, and he abhors math. Like, just hates it. Like, I have to peel him off the floor to do anything math related. And the crying, the drama, and of course I fell into that whole, okay, well, maybe, he's got ADHD, maybe he's got this, he's got that. Well, I did all the traditional things that most parents do, at least in Naperville. We went to a psychologist, got him tested, started tutoring outside, even started OT because of sensory issues. Did all the things in my checklist of being a good Naperville mom, and ended up, getting a 504 for him. So I got tons of support, and being an OT, I had so many resources, but my son was not making an iota of progress. And in the meantime, that psychological mess that he was in, he was spiraling into this, I'm rubbish, I'm never going to be as good as, my brothers, I'm just not good at school's not for me. And that was just harrowing for me as a mum and as somebody who'd been there, right? So, I was in the thick of my doctorate at the time, so I was like, okay, you know what? The doctor had been pushing meds, so I was like, okay, let's try it, because I just need to get through my thesis, and then I'll worry about what to do with Tristian. Ended up putting him on meds for a bit for ADHD, and that was a whole different experience. Did it work? Did it not? Who knows? I have no idea, because nothing with medication was data-based. It was all very sort of subjective, anecdotal. Well, how do you think he's doing? And they're asking the score. And then there were days he was just walking around like a zombie because the dose was wrong or whatever. Anyway, we had lots of problems. And the other thing that I found is like my other boys would chastise Tristian. They'd be like, oh, have you not had your meds today? Like if he was misbehaving or whatever. And I thought, oh gosh, really? Like it was just not something I knew I wanted long term. So alongside my doctorate in health sciences, I was allowed to do like 20 credit hours in the master's program. And I chose applied behavior analysis because it's a great adjunct being an OT, and behavior applies to everybody. So I was like, perfect. So I take this class. It's an online class in Florida. And the professor, Dr. Behrens, she teaches a class on precision teaching. This was one of my last classes in this course. So I'm listening to her teach and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what Tristian needs. It's a precise measurement system and it's applied to academia. I'm like, how brilliant. So right that moment I called her, I picked up the phone and I called my professor and I thought, I'm just going to do this. And I asked her, I said, look, I want help for my son. And I just saw your course and I want to know how I can get it. And actually the first thing I said to her is, I'm an OT, don't hold it against me, because I don't know if you know, but a lot of times ABAs and OTs don't quite think alike. They're not really in sync always. So I was a bit trepid about that. And I just said, I want this for my son. How do I get it? And she's like, well, there's nothing in Illinois, so you'd have to come to New York. And I was like, well, I'm there. So I went there over Thanksgiving. I basically asked them to train me so I could teach my son. That was my only goal, was to help Tristian in math. Got certified in it, came back to Chicago, and the program is based on fluency. So the criteria was I'd have to work with him 4 times a week.
So if you like what you're hearing, or you don't, and you want to come on and talk about it, go ahead and visit greenfieldsacademy.com and let us know that you want to be on the podcast and you want your opinion to be heard. I'd love to hear from you. So
I was doing my doctorate working, and then I was working with Tristian. It was mad, but I was like, I want to see this. The program claims to move students at least 1 grade level in 40 hours. And I was like, oh, I want to see this for myself. So I did it. I worked with Tristian, and sure enough, he moved a whole grade level within 2.5 months. And that was with me working with him at least 3 to 4 times a week. And not only did his grades improve, but his self-perception. He was like, Mom, I'm really good at math now. And actually, it was funny. I took him to the psychologist. I didn't tell the psychiatrist or psychologist, whoever prescribed the medication. I didn't tell them anything. I took him over for his follow-up appointment. The doctor interviewed Tristian and said, Tristian, so how is school going? And Tristian said to him, I'm really good at math now. And I almost fell off my chair. I'm like, you're good at math. Like, this is the child that I'd have to peel off the floor and, big crying match about math. So I knew that I'd done something right then. And then the doctor says to me, well, Miss Mehra, it sounds like the medication's working. And I was like, I took him off meds 4 months ago because I wanted to see if this program really works. So that's really how my experience with Tristian, my son, opened the doors for me, and doing my doctorate brought me to this program that eventually helped my son.
So that's FIT Learning, right?
Yes.
And so how are you involved with that now?
Well, so after I saw the first-hand results with my son, I was like, my gosh, why isn't this available for everybody? And so the founders asked me if I would be interested in opening a lab here in Chicago. And I actually opened one in Naperville first, quit my day job and said, okay, this is what I'm doing, because I just believed in it. I was so passionate about it. And I can honestly say that we changed lives. We transformed students. We'd had students who'd come to us in the 4th percentile, and we moved them to 80th percentile within 40 hours. It was phenomenal, and it still is. It is the best program that I have experienced as a parent, as a therapist. And so then my mission just became to let people know that it's available.
What makes the program so powerful?
Several things. The science we use is called precision teaching, which basically means there are precise measurement for each response, each item that we are assessing or measuring. So in traditional school, you know, you might learn something and then you take a test. And if you get 8 out of 10 or above, you pass. That's sort of the criteria. Our program is not based on just one test, because what we want to know is, have you truly mastered the material? Traditional school, there's no criteria for mastery. That's it. If you pass a test, in their eyes, you've mastered. So what we do is really test mastery all along the way, and it's based on fluency. So it's not just how many did you get right, how many did you get right within the time frame based on our research. We know that if you get X number correct in a minute, you have truly mastered this material. And that's what makes it so powerful, because we measure all along the way, every step of the way. And it's so transparent. That was the biggest thing that I had seen as a parent's perspective. I'd done so many programs for my son, traditional tutoring, where I'd be bribing him to go, which is another, like if you're bribing your child to learn, you've lost the battle before you even start, in my eyes. But what I was doing with Tristian was measuring his progress all along the way, and I could see it in a form of chart, and I could show his teachers, look, this is where he started and this is where he is now. Every single week I was able to give that data to his teachers, or to show my peers, say, look, he's, you know, I can see the results, I can see the improvements. Where in traditional tutoring, you're going once a week and it's never ending, and you don't get that transparency. You don't know if it's working or not. And that was important to me.
That's interesting, coming from someone who is a therapist as well, because I feel like in a lot of therapy, it's that type of, you don't know if you're improving or not, and it may never end. To bring that kind of scientific piece to it is, I think, is great.
Well, it really did open my eyes, even as an OT. So I adapted a lot of that measurement piece into my own practice, and I saw the results there too.
How would you see a way of incorporating this into like the future of the way we do formal education, as opposed to needing to have these things added on to the outside of what this, you know, big traditional system is?
The FIT learning curriculum, what we focus on is the foundational skills: math, reading, and logic. That's all. We don't claim to teach anything else. We're not science, we're not social studies. We are based on improving your learning capacity and ability. And how we do that is building fluency in those basic skills. So if that was part of the curricula in public school system, I can see how that would ameliorate so many problems later on, because I see it in our lab setting right now. Students feel more confident because they're really testing against themselves when they are in our program. And because we are based on behavior analysis, we know how to use positive reinforcement to really get the maximum amount of students. So if there was any way to inculcate this into the Chicago or any public school setting, it could only help and hopefully avoid those futuristic problems of, you know, behaviors that come around with not feeling good at something. The way we measure, the way we chart, it's very simple once you know it. And actually, Ogden Lindsley is who designed the precision teaching charts, and he designed them for teachers. so that they could measure. So really, we're just reviving something that was already scientifically introduced and proven to be effective.
Yeah, I think that's a great story, and the way you got there in your journey through your own education, and being able to see that not doing well in a K-12 setting doesn't mean not doing well in college or in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very informative thing, and to see so many kids struggle through their K-12 experience it's just heartbreaking. You know, if you're going through and you're getting 80%, 70%, even 90%, that still means you're showing that 10, 20, 30% you don't know. And then to just be pushed off into the next spot, it's like what Sal Khan called a Swiss cheese education, right?
Right.
You know, there's holes inside, you just don't know where they are.
Exactly. And I also feel like, education stops being fun then, because, and especially in math, I've seen this in math especially, is if you don't have those foundational skills, it is very hard. And our research shows that building fluency in these foundational skills actually improves your ability to do higher level thinking and functioning. I had a student that we tested math and reading. We only did a reading curricula. We didn't even touch math for the summer. And then we tested them again for both subjects, and they had improved in math when we hadn't even touched it. So there's this notion, the scientific notion of generativity, where what you're really doing when you build fluency is you are getting that brain to fire fast, right? Those neurons are firing, and that builds channels that were not there before, and that is applicable to any learning environment. So that was the other thing that I was really, really excited about with so many clients that I've seen. Parents would tell me, you know what, he would never talk before much, and now he's coming up with ideas that I don't even know where these come from. Well, that's that generativity and neurology playing. So there are just so many benefits. I think my wish is, I'd hope that one day I can introduce it to the public education system so it doesn't have to be a standoff.
Being good at one thing helps you be good with everything else. I think it's very much a mindset driven type thing where it is, I am a powerful learner, I just don't get this yet, versus where I think math can be especially difficult, where oftentimes we're taught one way to do it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't show your work and having done it that one way, even if you got the answer right, you're still marked as deficient.
Right.
And it's not like a nuanced thing with reading or writing where it's no, like you are wrong. And it makes it hard to kind of build a strong mindset off. We work on building a resilience around it, and mm-hmm. like, hey, we're just going to stick with this until you figure it out. And so they know that they can accomplish things. And I think bringing that mindset towards everything else, whether you built that up through reading or through logic or through math, is going to make you more confident and more engaged in the other parts of education and learning and going after the things that you want to learn. It gives you the power, like, hey, I'm interested in this thing and I know I can go learn it even if I don't have a teacher.
Right. Exactly. I think it's building confidence intrinsically, right?
Yeah, authentic confidence, right? Where it's not everyone gets a participation trophy.
Yes.
But everyone's given the time and supports to be able to get to where they need to get to, mm-hmm. Rather than feeling that like, oh, I'll never get there. I just can't do it. And a lot of victim speak, and I think negative self-talk comes from that. Like, I'm sorry, we just don't have more time. We're moving on. And you know it, quote unquote, well enough.
Yeah, and you may have some insight to this too. Like, I feel like when my children or my students do well in an assignment, there's that immediate reinforcement they get, and they're almost like they have this aura and good feel about them. And there's no doubt when you've received that reinforcement, there is that chemical release in the brain, and that's what is missing for so many students, and they're missing it for so long when they're struggling in school that they don't realize it's there. So what we do is really bring them back. If you ever have the chance to see our videos at any of our sessions, you'll see they're super fast paced, super engaging. There's no time to do anything except be engaged. And students really are competing with their own school. So that reinforcement they get, it's constant. We run about 44 timings in a session. That's a lot of reinforcement. And that's why students love our sessions. They don't avoid them. They don't try to get out. They enjoy coming because we're associating reinforcement with academics and schoolwork, which they're not always getting at school, sadly.
How do you make it so that the reinforcements that you're giving don't end up being so extrinsic that once those awards or recognitions are taken away, that the performance wanes?
That's a brilliant question. So the reinforcement they get is within the session, and what we're doing is building fluency in those foundational skills. However, we also take a test on a weekly basis using the CBMs, the curriculum-based measurements, which depending on math or reading, takes about 3 minutes to 8 minutes. So we take that on a weekly basis so we can see what we're doing in our sessions. Is it really this fluency building? Is it generalizing to their work? And they can see their own scores. So we take a test every Friday, for example, and they can see, oh, I was on 22nd percentile and today I'm at 50th percentile. And that is reinforcing just in their performance. And then we see it at school. Well, parents or teachers will email us and say, oh my gosh, he's reading really well. So that reinforcement comes there too. It is very, very holistic. And once it starts, it proliferates and it's very holistic. Because once you associate learning with reinforcement in a specific area, math or reading, it sort of feeds itself. You do it more and get more reinforcements. That's what we see all the time.
Yeah, you're building those neural pathways that associate learning with endorphins and in keeping them there.
Yeah, there's a term in ABA, it's called pairing. Basically, you pair something that's difficult with something that you really like, and eventually you start associating it. Your brain starts associating those two things. So initially, math is difficult, but we pair it with reinforcement that we extrinsically provide. And eventually, math, without us being the stimulus, becomes motivating.
Yeah, that's great stuff. From a since this isn't in all the schools, and what advice would you give to people out there so that we can help our children become more happy and healthy people in the world now? What types of people should be looking for fit learning? Who is a good quote unquote fit? And who maybe you aren't able to help as well?
Well, the criteria basically is we can only help students who are verbal. We cannot help any students who use the device or anything for talking, just because it is a verbal repertoire. But we help students from 3 all the way to 18. So parents ask me all the time, well, can this help my high schooler? Well, and I ask them, I'm like, do you think it would help your high schooler to come up with math facts or read faster? Do you think that would help the SAT score or ACT score? Absolutely, because it's all about timing and speed. We've got to get those math facts and things coming out faster so that they have more time to focus on the higher, more complex problems. But also research shows that if you are fast in these foundational skills, you're going to be faster, right? If you're fast in basic 1-digit multiplication, you're going to be faster at double digit. So we work with all types of students, and we do not focus on diagnoses. So that would be my suggestion for parents, is be cautious of labels. Whether it's dyslexia, ADHD, whatever it is, if you feel like it serves you to have a label, it helps your situation, by all means. But I found, being an OT also, that labels can be limiting because it sort of sets a ceiling. And I found myself doing that with my son. Well, he's got ADHD, he can't help it. Well, maybe he can't help it. Maybe it is harder for him, but that doesn't mean that I don't push him to be the best. That his ability. And then also thinking outside of the traditional tutoring model. I think as parents we get sort of complacent with it. It's like a traditional tutoring is like a band-aid approach. If you're not going back and diagnosing why is he struggling in math, or why is he struggling in reading, you're not really addressing the issue. You're just sort of addressing a very peripheral problem. And so I'd be cautious of that, because in your mind as a parent, it's sort of a placebo effect. Well, I'm doing everything I can, but are you really? And what's the most precious commodity we have as parents with our children? Time, right? To me, I would rather do an intensive program and be done with tutoring so that my son has time to play soccer and do all those other fun things than once a week tutoring forever. But I do want to say there are certain students who benefit from tutoring. So I'm not knocking all types of tutoring, but certain students don't. So you know your son or daughter best, but I would just be cautious of labels and just always going to the traditional methods.
Yeah, labels are a mixed bag, right? Sometimes they help us be able to identify and figure out which tools to use, and sometimes people end up becoming their label. And
exactly.
That's a really hard thing to swing out of.
Oh, I think you said it perfectly. That label. I mean, I had a student once who I was working with him at FIT, and I was like, "Oh, you know what? Your score was 10 here. I think you can get 12. Let's try to get 12 next time." And he goes, "Well, I can't because I have ADHD. You know that, right?" And because of my training in ABA, I just ignored that comment and we just moved on. And sure enough, he got the score he was supposed to. So it's about giving attention to the information you really want rather than and ignoring what you don't want, right? I didn't want to give attention to the fact that he has ADHD or he doesn't, whatever. I was like, all I care about is your best performance. So it's really, really important that we're cognizant of what labels can and can't do.
Yeah, no, and I think that your approach reminds me a lot of a great education technology that is out there too, that utilizes more engaging ways, more targeted approaches to be able to help young people more quickly develop the skills they need. But then they can't find an audience anywhere because they don't fit into schools, they don't fit into these places. And so we have a lot of this great learning science that just doesn't get used, where I think a program like yours, if we were using that type of precision level focus on getting all kids to mastery as quickly as they could, then the whole thing moves more quickly. When I first started with Greenfields, I was really interested in finding research on how we can get children to learn more quickly. And there's a remarkable dearth of research in that space. And I'm convinced it's because no one knows what to do with a college graduate who's 16 years old.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, so what we try to do is take advantage of like 2 hours of core work a day. And then what can we do in addition with all this time that we have? And that's where we do the really interesting projects and help kids explore and find their passions and their purpose and really get them to enjoy the whole learning aspect. And it's based on these skills. So it's like math, we don't learn just for math purposes. We utilize self-regulation and goal setting and prioritization as the real skills they're learning while they're getting the math concepts down. And those are the types of skills that I think really help them in the long run. And I think it's a lot of what happens with the stuff you're doing. It creates a stronger mindset for them that once they move out of math, once they get into science or once they get into life, they get in their job, they figure out what they want to do. They've got those baseline skills to be able to attack problems with an authentic confidence and the skills to be able to do it. So I think you're doing yeoman's work, and the fact that you kind of took it onto your life's work to make people's lives better and to make them more confident and stronger people. I commend you for that work, and I'm really excited about what you do.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to pretend it's been an easy journey. It has not. I have, I never wanted to be a business owner. That was never my intention. I'm rubbish at marketing and sales. That's not my thing. I'm really a therapist and a mom who found a brilliant solution, and I just wanted to share it with the world and parents who are interested. But it's been hard. It's been hard being a business owner with a new, our tendency is to go and look at things that are shiny and have lots of bells and whistles. And we are basically an independent contracting company. We don't have a huge advertising budget. We don't have all the shiny elements, I guess. But what we do have is research, 20 years of research and data. Everything we do is data-based. Even behaviors. We have a student who used to come to us who, mum would be like, he's always yawning, in his tutoring sessions and at school. And we took data on the behavior of yawning and decreased it to 0. So that changed his perspective at school and the way teachers looked at him. So learning is a lot more than just math and reading. It's your behaviors too, how active you are in the actual process of learning. So I so enjoyed the journey, and I continue to. So we have a location in Chicago, but I also have one in London. I just opened, and because I'm so passionate about it, I keep going, even though there are elements I don't like about having a business.
That's great. International expansion. Next, you're going to end up with one in Zambia. Get all your background covered.
I have a virtual one in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, nice. If people wanted to email you, how could they get a hold of you?
It's Dr. Aditi at fitlearnersil.com. So it's DRADITI at fitlearnersil.com.
Well, fantastic. Thanks you again for taking the time and joining us today. I think it was very informative for me, and I think our audience is really going to appreciate it. And hopefully they will see some more tools that they can help their children on their journeys.
Thank you, Rob. I'm so honored to be on your show. And I really do love your podcast and all that lovely information. I wish I'd found it earlier. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe and tune in next time for a fresh new episode of Education is Life.